we're going to continue what we worked on last week, but looking for interaction and help. I have nothing really completely understood. So as we look at the um, method in which Walter Parmenter worked with the Sunday Law Initiative, we work together with understanding Civil War and what it means today. And so I'm going to continue with some of the notes and a few things that I've read throughout the past week to go through, but I'm going to ask a question that we'll look to ponder after we go through a few quotes from the book. And the question is on the war in heaven. So be thinking about that as we go through this. What was the war in heaven? And I'll pull up our notes here in just a second. So does anybody remember or want to recap what we went through last week, if there's anybody willing? Don't be shy.
Well,
Go ahead,
I
Linda.
myself came across a book at the library. I wasn't looking for it. It was just there and wasn't the kind of book most anybody else would find interesting, but I was just kind of drawn to it. And I had never heard of the main character in the book, and read a little bit of it and found it really good, the way the author wrote and everything. And I was just reading a chapter this morning, and it was about Sula. Of course, I texted you about it, and I said, "Did you mention?" Because I could have sworn I heard somebody talk about Sula recently, and I had this idea in my mind that, especially after reading this chapter, that he was Trump. And I don't know what details exactly. I don't remember what details you went over, but the details I read this morning are definitely pointing in that direction. And the guy who wrote this book, it's like he wrote this book for our time. He cherry picked out the history of Rome, based on this particular character who happened to be a woman, and I'm sure nobody's ever heard of. It's all told from the viewpoint of her family's history. And I haven't gotten to the later part of the book that would talk about what she did. But I was on the chapter about Sula. And like I said, I didn't remember exactly what you had said. I just had this idea in my mind that he was a bad guy and he's probably, typical of Trump. And after reading what I read this morning, I would say definitely he's. And yeah, it's all pointing to the downfall of the United States, just like it pointed, what he did. I mean, he even had his own little Mar-a-Lago. It's just, and what he ended up doing after he destroyed the Republic was he went off by himself to this, whatever the book describes it as, his own little palace, his own little mansion is what it was. And as soon as I'm reading these details, I'm thinking of Mar-a-Lago or wherever he ends up settling. But I mean, if what is being talked about in this book, I mean, it's her father was the guy who he thought up the whole idea of the Roman roads, and it explains the reason why. And her whole family was, I mean, she had pictures of them on the walls of her family's home, and she learned about all these people, and they were all bent toward the direction of equality, of fixing the corrupt political system, even though her father ends up joining Sula because it became pretty much impossible to do anything without doing that. Yeah, people were killed. And this guy came on the scene. There was an insurrection. I don't know if that's the same details your book talks about, but I think this book I picked up this week, and I can only keep it for 2 weeks, is definitely an interesting, worthwhile read. And while I'm reading and I'm thinking about how everybody else would find it interesting.
Can you put the title
Um,
in the chat?
Yeah.
in case anybody wants to check it out.
Yeah.
Sula was, I did mention Sula. He was the first time they used the phrase, or with him, the first time they used the phrase Civil War, where Rome actually marched against Rome. And
Hmm.
so what you were going through was very similar. It was the beginning and it worked its way towards then Caesar and Pompey, and then eventually when Augustus becomes empire, and now we're back to an empire. Or is an empire and a monarchy the same thing? Seems to me they are, but maybe there's a difference. But it's an empire. So Rome began as a monarchy, became a republic, and then returned to, if a monarchy is the same as an empire, it goes to an empire. And from what I've been learning, yeah, the battle is when it's the citizenry of a nation. And when he, well, before we go any further, we'll read a few of the quotes that I do have that like I think I said it last week, the book seems to be in three sections. I'm still not complete with it, but I'm in the section of the 19th century because it goes through all this Roman history in one section, and then it goes through the history of revolutions of the 18th century, and then it goes into the 19th century, and that's as far as I'm in that section now. Um,
Lane,
yes.
I looked up the difference between a monarchy and an empire.
Oh,
If I
thank you.
share that, okay? It
Yeah,
says a
sure.
monarchy is a form of governance led by a single individual, king or queen, while an empire typically refers to a vast sovereign state under a single supreme authority, often an emperor encompassing various territories and peoples. So I think it's a geographical difference.
In like a larger scale.
Yeah, like Napoleon had an empire. He
Yeah.
wasn't just the king of France. He had, like, and the Roman rulers had created an empire all around the Mediterranean Sea.
So the
The,
monarchy would be more local
yeah,
in the empire.
um, because Britain was local, but it also became an empire and then it fell away because all the colonies eventually got their independence and the empire shrank and now they're just like a
Let's see if
figurehead.
it's Babylon then, going all the way back to Babylon, because the city actually was the center, but it became the Babylonian Empire.
Yes. And so the Persian, same thing. It's when you make land grabs, I think.
What would you
Uh,
think that, how would you think that relates to today?
well, that fits the three stages of from the glorious land, well, from conquer the king of the north, then the glorious land, then Egypt, the world. That's empire.
Is the empire. That's how I've been seeing it. I read an article this morning. Maybe I'll share it later in the forum. I think it was The Guardian, and I can't remember her name. Maybe somebody else saw it as well. But it was a woman that they put in charge of the HHS, that's the health, right? Health and Human Services for the global, what's it called? She's in a position in HHS that's a global position. And it goes on to talk about, I read it in the middle of the night when Shiva was outside, so I need to read it again. But it was talking about her position. She kind of comes out of semi nowhere, and then they give a little bit of background history. But she's totally anti-abortion, anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ, all of that, and they start going into a little bit of that history. But she's in this global position for the Trump administration, and you can see the this taking of what's becoming, if policy is the right words, these policies in the United States, and being a transactional person that he is, everybody has to abide by his way to be able to participate. So you can see the values that are in this administration being, and policies in this administration being pushed globally. And that's what I saw when you look at this issue of civil war. The question comes along between the difference of civil war and revolution. And with civil war being defined initially as a war amongst the citizenry, I don't know if you ran across this, Kathy, but this book goes into some of the details of the American Revolution only from the perspective of it was initially called Civil War by some. And one of the reasons he goes into that is you had during the American Revolution, you had those, what they call them, the loyalists and the patriots.
Patriots, yeah.
So you had that international interaction going on between nations.
Well, the
And
interesting thing is I haven't come across the term Civil War, but because at the time the colonies were independent countries, states. So they weren't fighting. I guess if anybody disagreed, because most of the colonies, some were definitely loyalists, some were, patriots and wanted independence, but they all still wanted to remain independent. And there may have been, which I haven't come across the term, but I still see, like within each colony, there were people who wanted independence and people who didn't, who really, and then the definition of what it meant to be independent is being discussed too.
yeah, I
And
have found that I have to be an ultra sifter, that I am weak in comprehension to begin with, let alone be an ultra sifter.
yeah, and I have so much lack of knowledge and bias from the history I learned
Yes.
in high school. So what I'm reading now is like, okay, they didn't teach this, or if they did, I really forgot it. But I think we've learned more and have more honest historians, which is why, you can see that this current administration is trying to erase our history. He's removing Black History Month. He's removing women's history. All those people are being removed out of the museums and out of the websites of the government. So
Yes.
it's the when you're in charge of history, you then can change the narrative, um, and if you weren't taught right in the first place, probably happy about it. But anyway, so it's really interesting. The narrative, they're in control of changing all that. And just like the wall of presidents that Trump has created with the photographs, and then he puts
Yeah.
a commentary
Yeah.
under each president, um, he's creating the narrative.
Yes.
So it's so 1984, right?
Yeah.
The book,
It's
the book.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I read that this morning. I saw the picture of Obama and what he had written underneath it. It's amazing to what I find more amazing is the people that still support it. And as that continues on, it's like Egypt all over again when the plagues were falling, and there were those amongst Pharaoh's people, there were those that were saying, "Give it up, let them go," and then there were those that were digging their heels in, and we're literally watching that before our eyes. So this will continue where we kind of left off on this. I want to read a few quotes as we go through there, and then I want to get to a part that I don't have typed up that we'll read when it comes to looking at I think it was the part about the American Revolution, but we'll see when we get there. So we did read this section last night. The Roman Republic, the period when neither kings nor emperors ruled the Roman people, was the best illustration of this corruption, and talking about this corruption that goes on within monarchy. So this was another person that he's quoting in the book, Sir Robert Filmer, and he's a staunch monarchist. He says there's conflict, we're just talking about the conflict between the nobility and the people led to seditions that then spawned a destructive sequence of civil wars. The social war was plainly civil. the wars of the slaves and other of the fencers, the civil wars of Marius, and this is, I believe, Sulla, that Linda just mentioned, just another spelling of it, and Catiline, of Caesar and Pompey, the triumvirate, and of Augustus, Lepidus, and Antonius. All these shed an ocean of blood within Italy and the streets of Rome, contradicting those like Florus, who saw Rome's greatest achievement, the expansion of its empire. This is switching into the next page. The expansion of the empire as the fruit of democratical government. Filmer, because he's arguing this, Filmer argued even at those times when the Roman victories abroad did amaze the world, then the tragical slaughters of citizens at home deserved commiseration from their vanquished enemies. These wars continued until, while Rome expanded as its citizens turned their conquering arms upon themselves, until the civil contentions at last settled the government again into a monarchy. So Filmer is arguing for the monarchist view of things, and they see the civil wars as kind of a process that brings them, as almost necessary to bring them back to monarchy. And this continues in the same section. To prove the necessity of monarchy and the instability of Republican government, Filmer had turned the Republican narrative, speaking of what Kathy's talking about, how they changed the narrative, he had turned the Republican narrative of civil war on its head in the service of an Augustan account of the benefits of monarchy for securing peace. So you need monarchy because monarchy is what's going to now secure peace. Sidney's rebuttal of Filmer was equally polemical. He argued, as Sulla, that the spoils of empire were like an infection that ravaged the body politic. And this was quoting, "'Twas hard, if not impossible, to preserve a civil equality when the spoils of the greatest kingdoms were brought to adorn the houses of private men. It was not adherence to a republican constitution that had caused Rome's seditions and ultimately its civil wars. It was straying from that constitution." So we read that last bit here last week. So now we look a little bit about Civil War. This was the next section in the 18th century, Civil War in the Age of Revolutions, the next section in the book. So the Romans and their descendants had, and I had to look this word up, I'd never heard it before, had concatenated, I don't even know if I'm going to say it right. I said it in my head, but I don't seem to say it out loud. Concatenated, I don't know. But they link things together in a chain or a series. So they linked these things, specific internal struggles, into larger narratives that, for the most part, assumed that civil wars would form a destructive sequence of events. So civil wars would form a destructive sequence of events. Monarchists and writers favoring empire would depict that cumulative horror as the disease for which autocratic rule would be the cure. So the civil wars, according to what he's showing in here, would be this sequence of events that would be such a horror and a disease that would return to an autocratic rule. Toward the end of the 18th century, contemporary European thinkers could distinguish at least three forms of civil war. So you had in the 18th century, he talks about wars, civil war or revolutions in Asia that were taking place in various places. And so by the time you get to the end of the 18th century, the European thinkers were distinguishing three forms of civil war. First one was, I don't know if I'm going to say these right either. It looks like secessionist, I don't know. Besetting sin of monarchies. The besetting sin of monarchies is what they refer to that, the monarchies themselves, and the sins of them. And then the supersessionist is the opposite parties battle for authority over a single territory. And then the secessionist The modern use of secession referred more generally to the attempt by part of a political community to break away from the existing political authority and assert its own independence, or, in the words of the American Declaration of Independence of 1776, when one people dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitled them. It was only after the success of Britain's North American colonies in exiting from the empire in 1776 that this model began to proliferate and to gain legal recognition. Thus, the Americans provided a truly revolutionary conception of civil war that would be imitated across the world in the following 2 centuries. So what took place then, what I got out of this piece right here, is that America became this, I don't know, icon, this example that others followed, which is kind of what we're seeing today. But this was to lead in the direction of people fighting for their rights, people fighting for equality. Now we see the reverse of that, people fighting to take away the rights and people fighting to take away equality. But America here became the light in the world. I don't know how else to say that. Reagan said the city on a hill. It became what prophetically its role was in the 6th kingdom to be good and do good. Even though it was in its infancy and very ignorant and doing many things wrong, it was set out on this course prophetically to be good. Did that make sense? Anybody have any thoughts or questions on that? And don't
well
take me
said.
as,
Thank you.
okay, and don't take me as the know-all, because you're dealing with somebody who really struggles to sort out who's saying what. Okay, so then we go to the American Revolution, which I just brought up with what Kathy was talking about. And was it revolution or was it civil war? And there's several pages talking on that. And I'm going to read a little section of it as we go through. So as we already mentioned, you had the Patriots and the Loyalists. And then they talked about going into the 19th century. This is the next section of the book, the Civilizing Civil War, 19th century. So let me turn, I don't have all this typed up, so we're going to read some of it, and it's going to go into some things by Lincoln, and it was pretty, I hope, and if I can later, maybe I'll type it up to, for anybody that might want it. And I could not find this, like I said, in PDF. It would be nice to have it in PDF. And I'm interested. I don't know if Olivine's here. I know Olivine is trying to get this book. And if anybody does, it'd be nice to discuss it with later to get other people's thoughts and conclusions out of what they get from it as well. So so looking at what he's talking about on page 163 and then going into 64, 65, it's talking about civil war being a gift from heaven. And I'll read that passage. And then he goes on to say that someone saying wars of opinion or ideology. That's what a civil war is defined as, wars of opinion or ideology. And so I'm going to begin with a little bit about Lincoln on his understanding, his implicit understanding of the Great Civil War. And that struggle became a paradigm of the relationship between secession and civil war. And he goes on to say, we should be suspicious by now that the words civil war could ever be used without political intent or ideological baggage. Following the age of revolutions, civil war was supposed to have become an illegitimate form of struggle, a throwback to the turbulent rule of kings or to the recurrent instability of Republican Rome. So civil war wasn't supposed to exist after the revolutions. And to do so, if I understand this, what he's saying here, it's taking you back to the time of Rome and the fight for monarchies. Let's see. So the kings or to recurrent instability of Republican Rome, an ancient curse that enlightened modern times had lifted. Some did not think so. For example, the mid-18th century French Republican, I'm not going to be able to read his name, Mably 1709 to 85, has an English milord in his dialogue, The Rights and Duties of the Citizen, and that was in 1758, shockingly state that, quote, civil war is sometimes a great good, for it can act as a surgery to remove a gangrenous limb that could destroy the body politic. The early Spanish liberal politician, and I'm not going to be able to say his name, Juan Romero Alpuente, I think, likewise argued in a speech that civil war is a gift from heaven, offering a chance for national renewal, a phrase that would echo through Spanish history into Spain's civil war in the 20th century. In 1830, the French politician and memoirist, the Baron de Chateaubriand, mocked those lovers of humanity. This is, quote, lovers of humanity. These mocked those, quote, lovers of humanity who, in armed quarrels, distinguish species and faint at the very name of civil war. Compatriots who kill each other, exclamation point. Brothers, fathers, sons confronting one another, another exclamation point. All this is no doubt very sad. However, a people is often strengthened and regenerated by internal discords. So civil war might still be just in the eyes of those for whom it is necessary, but as ever, the question was who decides it is necessary and when to call it civil war. So arguing back and forth still the issue between civil war and revolution. This one is actually mocking what civil war does, and I thought it was interesting that he's in a mocking way talking about brothers against fathers, etc. When we know we see that reference in the Bible when people are against each other. So we're going to go on to the wars of opinion on page 165, and just to give a teeny bit of background or context, it's going to talk about, I'm not going to, Clausewitz, Clausewitz, Clausewitz on War, and that's from 1832, Karl von Clausewitz, never mentions civil war. As mentioned earlier, there is no great work of strategy titled on civil war, even as a parallel to Mao Zedong's or Che Guevara's work on guerrilla warfare. So I was going to go on to say what he is. So Clausewitz, contemporary rival in the theory of war, Antoine Henry Jomini, he was a Swiss officer who had served with the French army, does admit civil wars and wars of religion, but he concedes to want to give maxims for these sorts of war would be absurd. This was because he viewed these as wars of opinion, or as we might now say, wars of ideology, and as such more destructive and cruel than wars of policy because they're more irrational. There was a section that was discussing, I brought up the name last week, Vattel, Vattel, and he was the one who became a legal scholar in the subject, and discussing, and was where Jefferson got a lot of his base for Declaration of Independence, in discussing the law of nations, because initially the law of nature and the law of nations, because initially when with all the great wars that took place in Europe, it was in 1863 that the Red Cross was founded, but they did not, I hope I say this right, they did not consider civil war as, I hope I paraphrase this right, not a part of their work. So while you see all the blood and slaughter of the actual American Civil War in the 1860s, the Red Cross is actually formed, but not when it came to Civil War, because they really didn't understand or were arguing the difference between Civil War and Revolution, and that Civil War, are they citizens against citizens, or are they just rebels? And if they're rebels, then they ought to be treated with by domestic law. I think I said that right, as opposed to the laws of war. So there was a distinction when it came to Civil War and how to treat people. Are they belligerents or are they rebels? And so the initial creation of the Red Cross did not address the bloodshed in the Civil War. Hope I said that right. Maybe somebody has some background on that along the ways. And as well, when the Geneva Convention came about as well, they did the same thing. And it was several years later that they started to look at and try to reevaluate Civil War in their purposes. Okay, so going towards the right to secede from a union. This is going to be a kind of a little bit longer section, and stop me if you want me to go back or repeat anything. So this is beginning on 167. I'm going to read two little pieces out of it. So Abraham Lincoln's decision to pronounce the conflict in the United States a great civil war was, as suggested, contestable even in 1863. For to do so was to presume the Union's interpretation of the Confederacy's actions. It was to affirm that combatants on both sides had been and still remained members of the same political community, the United States of America. And if anybody remembers as well, even when it came to the Civil War, hope I say this right, the Confederates had support from, is it Britain or France? Probably Britain. Maybe somebody remembers that. So it goes on to say the label also heightened what was at stake in the conflict, the unity of the nation and the inviolability of the Constitution, as well as the illegitimacy of unilateral secession. To term it the Civil War at any time after 1865 has been to accept the victory of that interpretation and of the principles of the Union had sought to protect and defend. So they're saying they have the right to secede. That conclusion was hard won, and still the term would remain a source of friction well into the 20th century. But it would prove futile to seek to change the accepted name for the defining cataclysm of American history. It would also become morally unacceptable to challenge the logic of the term Civil War, implying as it did unity as much as division, and so often in the history of ideas of Civil War, recognition of commonality amid rupture. This paradox would remain especially acute in the North American case as the conflict became the test case for the legitimacy of secessionist civil war everywhere. So go ahead, yeah.
Sorry. I looked up about Britain supporting the Confederates, and they did not. They remained neutral, and they actually saw the Confederates as belligerents and not as a separate nation, because they seceded, and so they actually thought that their quote King Cotton would give them, because they exported so much product to Britain, they thought that would be a way to get in their good graces, but it didn't work out that way.
I know it's really, for me, it's hard because I never was a history person anyways, and it kind of doesn't matter if you were or not because they were teaching you wrong history. But when it came to the Civil War, being two of the same political, how do you say, I want to say geographical areas, political state, that when he later argues that when you have these two sides, they become torn and separated, And then he compares it to being like, because then he says they become two nations. And in the sense that they become two nations, no longer is it a civil war, it's an international war. And so it's really complex to look at it, but some of this background is what stirred my thoughts towards the war in heaven, which will,
Yeah, it's really interesting because the Confederates were like they really the states that seceded, they had a president, they had a capital, they literally sent emissaries out to Britain, acting as a separate nation.
yeah, yes. So they
And
became, yeah, the question is they became two nations. So what does
hmm
that mean? Is it a civil war or is it not? So I think that's why you have so many muddy boundaries
yeah,
on civil war and revolution.
Didn't they
Um,
even have their own constitution?
yeah, I
yes,
think so.
yeah, they
They
were ready to go. They were ready to go. So
they were ready right after Lincoln was elected.
yes,
He took office, I think, in November. Back then, that was the date. Um, was it November? Anyway, they seceded by December of 1860. That's when he was elected, I think, was 1860.
I think so.
Yeah.
So continuing through this, just one more paragraph. It's a little lengthy one, not too bad. So for supporters of the Confederacy, it was not a war between fellow citizens or members. This is going to touch on that same point. Fellow citizens or members of the same civil society. And this is an argument by Algernon Sidney might have said. It was a secessionist civil war fought to establish, among other things, the right to secede and ignited by a series of acts of secession from the Union. This made it, from the Confederate vantage point, not an intra-national conflict, but an international one. A war between polities, not within the bounds of a single community. The Confederate States argued that they had exercised their constitutional right to secede from the Union and believed they had now formed a new Union, as Kathy was saying, the Confederate States of America, which was entitled to conduct its own affairs, including its own military defense, as an independent entity. By contrast, the logic of the Union and of Lincoln rendered the Confederacy's secession an act of rebellion and the conflict to suppress it a civil war. And yet Lincoln himself used the term rebellion almost 6 times as often as civil war during the conflict. So the issue, as I understand it, is this battle between Civil War and Revolution, because the Civil War kind of spills over, and as it may have been within the colonies initially, geographically, this one area, they wanted to become their own nation, which, as I read that again just now, goes back to the idea of the selfish me view, as opposed to what I've kind of been seeing as America as this prophetic role, was to eventually bring on this international look. And when you go to, then you fast forward to globalism, that globalism was, in the forming of the UN, was a way to have nations work together cooperatively, at which when they would work together cooperatively and each be dependent on the other for whatever they may trade and et cetera, that they would be less likely to go to war. But it seems that when you see this selfish meitis side, that's when you actually wind up creating war.
Hey,
That's how
Elaine,
I see it. Yeah.
I just had a thought. So, interestingly, all think about the slave trade and that there was human beings considered property in the founding of the nation. And that went unaddressed for decades.
Yes.
So, and the South at one point, I think it was in it was in the 1850s, mid 1850s, they had the presidency, the House, and the Senate, and they were ready to take over and make slavery a national thing, like legal. And that's when Lincoln decided he was going to run for office and wanted to get politically involved and all that. So they've been decades with this building their own wealth, and it's perfectly, quote, normal, and they're making a fortune off of the hard labor of human beings that they, quote, own and mistreat. So you can see in their mind why they would rebel, but to them it's not rebelling. It's
Yeah.
preserve. They want to
Yes.
preserve what the Union had at the beginning. And so they couldn't see a future of universal human rights because all they could see was dollar signs. And there wasn't I think now we can see that, the battle for the United States, the Lamb Kingdom trying to do its job as a lamb. And then there had to be moments in the history that required action, right? Because even you had to get the result of the Civil War was the 13th and 14th Amendments. So it had to be, the people had to rise up for those things to change. And it
Yes.
was
And
like,
go ahead,
it's like
sorry.
it was necessary. It was a necessary thing to do.
Yes.
And it took the South. I mean, so it's like it's awful, but it brought the right result. Does that
And
make sense?
yeah, it does, because I hope that we can all by now see that looking through the lens of religion was very narrow.
Mm-hmm.
And this was with the woman um having a place now here, the good woman having a place now here to do a good work, how narrow it is to see that woman as religion, at least in the terms of the sixth and seventh head, because religion wasn't going to be what would control the global world. So now you have this fight for globalization. When you go back and you look within the Bible, God had it's God had there was the temple, there was the religious side of it, but then beyond that was everybody else. And you had Israel being, I don't know, discriminatory, biased, everything else that was, I don't know the right words to put in there, that they were the special people and everybody else was, there was the discrimination, same discrimination going on when God was trying to unite, where the purpose, it seems to be, to unite the world. And it didn't, I still struggle with it. It doesn't seem like it's all only about religion. It's about the whole world and the freedom to, this nation was to give you that freedom to worship however you want.
Yes. Yes.
And
So we're the microcosm for the macro, local to global.
yes, Yes. And so this nation was the opening of the way because they were even discussing this as being international versus, the work internationally, the wars and such, and then trying to work together internationally instead of against each other and backing into your selfish corner. I don't know if I say that right because it's really hard for me to put my thoughts into words as I read this book. So,
So isn't it, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
no, go ahead.
I was
Oh,
just going to say too, isn't
this,
somebody else? Is that Jackie?
I think it's Jackie.
yeah,
Go ahead,
I was going
Jackie.
to say something, but go ahead, Kathy.
No, you go because I've shared enough.
No, I love your thoughts. Yeah, it's sparking so much thought in my mind because I'm really into history. I always have been. And seeing this in such a way now as we go back, you know, with the thoughts that Elaine has mentioned about heaven, I thought of this quite a long time back too, the war in heaven. And of course, we're going to have this on the earth because Satan is working on the earth to separate and divide. And my thought about America being a superpower, how did it become the superpower? Where everybody seems to succeed, if you want to use that word, or bow down to America. And of course, our policies have been going along this line of takeover in different countries. Way back, the Bushes, you look at all, the presidents in our, say, generation. And the policies were to, and we can look at it in Saudi Arabia, how we're chums. Trump's very chummy with his family, with Saudi Arabia. And all the elements there of their natural resources, oil. We studied that too, how the takeover, was oil for America. We're going to get something out of this. We're not doing anything for nothing here. So, it's just gone along these lines, and it seems it's worse and worse and worse now, where the oligarchy and the rich are controlling everything. And it isn't just that their money is so important, it's their power that is important. Because money buys power. And America has been based on old wealth. We mentioned this, I think, last week, and new wealth. It's mostly old wealth, old money coming from the Rockefellers and, along that lineage. So, of course, it stays in the same hands throughout the years and generations. And this is what's going through my mind right now as why we are where we are in this time we're living in, at the very end of time, where we have the wealthy, the very, very wealthy, the richest man in the world being Musk. And he's an oligarch, but yet he's also a technocrat. And the technocrats now and the very wealthy people with money, the old money, new money, are coming together and forming an alliance. And they have their plan. I mean, even I've heard through sources that I listen to that they have their plan of leaving this earth and going to Mars. Because they know they're not going to get away with this without the people rising up against them, and they already are. Not just in America, but other countries too. So those are my thoughts right now. And I just thank you for bringing this book forth. I haven't gotten it yet, but I know there is much information in it that will help us to understand history better and see exactly where we are in this time we're living in, at least physically. And it is the rich against the poor. And what would you say? The poor person is not just a person that doesn't have much income. They don't have millions and millions of dollars, but there's numbers. The poor people outnumber the rich. And that's where the Civil War is. Because what if the people just stop buying? What if they just stop supporting it? What would happen to these corporations if people stopped buying? If they stopped using credit cards, if they stopped financing, but then again, oh, I broke, so I have to go borrow money. So
Continue in your
it's a
slavery and
situation
bondage.
where, pardon me?
Continue in your slavery and bondage to them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You're helpless if you're broke, if you're just struggling to get by. Then what do you have? I mean, you join other people that don't have much money either. But what can you do about it? Just say, I'm going to stop buying. You have to buy your food and survive. You have to pay your taxes if you own property, and keep raising them more and more and making it more and more difficult to pay them. So it's a cause and effect of how the people are going to suffer even more, not just people out there all around us, but ourselves, God's people, are going to suffer. Because everything is getting more expensive. So this is my thoughts this morning, and it's not just this morning, it's been going this way with me for quite a few months now, just looking at this whole picture and understanding things more and more clearly. I listened to a podcast on Substack by Joy Reid. I don't know if any of you have listened to her. She was a main report. She wasn't a reporter. She did investigative reporting, yes, but she was on some of the main channels now, the news channels. And just as a side note, most of these people on Substack have left the mainstream news sources because they're being bought out by the rich, by the oligarchs. They already have. CBS is gone now completely. And their main reporters or news broadcasters made a speech yesterday. It was their last day there. CBS, the evening news. So not to get sidetracked, but this is what's happening. So Joy Reid is talking about all of this. She was giving a message yesterday on Substack, and I thought she was in the message here. It was so close to what we know and believe. She was explaining all about Republicans and liberals, and she doesn't go way back into history, but she gives a present story of what's happening. And she interviewed a man who sees the same thing. He is has written a book. I can't think of his name now. She's going to have him on her program every third Wednesday on Substack, and they do a report together. They share together on what's going on in the economy and the news sources and everything. So I get much information from her. She makes it very simple to understand. So, and she is a Black woman. I believe she was born in Jamaica. So, but anyway, a good news source, Joy Reid. So I just are throwing all these thoughts out, but I've taken up some time here this morning, but I just wanted to share where I'm coming from. And I enjoy your thoughts too, and knowing, what everyone is thinking and what we're going on in this time we're living in. And the history, to know where this country's come from, is very, very important to bring it up to the time we're living in now. So thank you for listening to me.
Yeah, I think Alyssa had her, oh, Kathy does too, but I think Alyssa had her hand up first. If you still wanted to, if it was Alyssa or Tom.
Thanks. Well, it was a brief thought of you had emphasized the rebels over Confederates, and it's a small thought, but it just seemed striking that how biblical it goes to. And I don't know, I was seeing a different overlay of the line of, the start of the Civil War being close of probation. 63 was supposed to be the second advent. And it wasn't. Just like in Jesus's time, Jesus died and it disappointed a lot of people, all having a misunderstanding of the kingdom. Not that, well, I guess maybe the Adventists in 63 had a misunderstanding of the kingdom. Trying to avoid creating a kingdom on earth while also failing to see that they were supposed to have a hand in getting rid of slavery. Because if you don't love your fellow human being, you don't love God. And taking a silent stand, and I know a lot of Adventists didn't take a silent stand, but also that Ellen White is criticized for not being more open about abolition, not supporting it more, not making it more of a central. And I think that was a huge failing for the Adventist people, of not seeing slavery as the major cause for the time, to put forth laws to fight against. And the Sixth Kingdom did that in a way that had made room for the dragon to speak later, because slavery wasn't actually abolished. It was just hidden really well by corporate interests, as Jackie pointed out. And
Would you say,
go
would
ahead.
you say that Ellen White had a very narrow religious view as opposed to the broader picture?
I don't know if I would put it that way, just because the narrow religious view I see is on the side of the South. But maybe there was also a narrow religious view as to not having role in politics. Maybe that was a small religious view, one that clouded. I mean, there's so many evidences of impact that the Adventist culture has had on America. The breakfast foods, the freedom of conscience. I mean, I can't think right now of all the different things that I grew up not in Adventism, but looking back, I feel like I was in Adventism. I lived the health message. I was very conservative in the similar ways that Adventists were conservative. But that one thing that could have had a huge impact, anti-slavery, instead was a health message. And I don't know, it seems wholly inadequate in one sense. And yet I understand that she was trying to keep a people together, trying not to entangle in politics because I don't know. And she was also influenced by her husband and the people around her, uh, in a way. I mean, she might have. I realized that she might have. I think there was a time, and I know Parmenter had discussed about how she wasn't influenced, but and in many ways I agree. But at the same time, she married her husband because she was influenced by the will of the people, because she didn't want to be seen as a untoward woman who was studying alone with men. So I can't say that influence wasn't a part of her decisions, but now I feel like I've lost the plot. But the I don't know, we could have done so much better. And I think that's why we're in the mess that we're in, as a country. But at the same time, we're also where we're supposed to be, prophetically speaking. Yeah, I'll stop.
Thank you for that. And Kathy has her hand up too.
Oh, hey, thanks. I'm gonna kind of loop back around to where you originally were speaking about, but I can't remember your topic, but I remember what I wanted to share before Jackie shared and Alyssa. And it was about secession, the Civil War. The United States at that time was less than 100 years old. And I was looking into a little bit of the French Revolution. I can't remember. They either had 12 constitutions after their revolution in 1789. I mean, it ended in 1793. They either had 12 constitutions in 15 years or they had 15 constitutions in 12 years. My point being, they had many, and the United States had one for a brand new nation. So the nation that comes up out of the sea had a really hard time getting that universal freedom, equality, all of that, as far as their battles, because within 20 years they were back to a monarchy. So the battle for them was really intense. So I see that the Sixth Kingdom prophetically and on a bigger scale picture looking out, they're like, if you look at it as kind of see it like it's a good thing, but there's bad behavior. Just like human beings can do good, but have bad behavior too, but you grow and you mature. And not to make any excuses for slavery or anything, because if you want, you can just only focus on the bad. The Constitution started with slavery. I mean, come on, really. I mean, but the point is, where is the sixth supposed to prophetically, where is that lamb? And I think that's what I'm trying to focus on and understand. Where is that lamb? And where does that fit in our history, and what do we understand, and what was it that made it a lamb, and what did they lose that turned them into a dragon? That, was allowed the dragon to be. And interestingly, I'm sorry, I'm almost done.
Oh, that's okay.
If you think about it, this is a global stage. So the European countries love the idea of a divided United States, right? They're less of a threat. France really wanted Southern cotton, but it didn't want to step in. And they really wanted to go into Mexico. But, you know what I mean? So there's still conquering going on in this time period. It's not a settled thing with these nations. And of course, the indigenous peoples, they're just like, shoved aside from the very beginning. And everything's at their expense too. So it's really, I'm finding it just a challenge. And I'm going to try and share this next week. Where's the lamb? Where can we see the lamb, and what does that look like? Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You did say one thing that I wanted to comment on when it came to the bad. The bad wasn't necessary in heaven, by no means. It wasn't meant to be at all. But when you juxtapose things, you bring those two opposites together. That's when people can more clearly see. So the bad actually helped in the turnover to the good, if that made sense.
Yes, but I mean, the bad started from the beginning, and I used to always think, well, where's the good in the lamb? It started out with a rotten constitution.
Yeah.
And there were
They had
people
a lot to unlearn. They had just like we read, we apply
Yes.
it to ourselves by Ellen White's writings, that we had a lot to unlearn. When you
Yes.
personify the United States, make it a person, the United States had a lot to unlearn, so that it couldn't unlearn without it being black and white, how bad it was.
Yeah. So
And
I
I
guess
don't
if we
mean
look at
literally
it,
like skin, but but you had to bring this the issue of hate and love that close together before people could understand it.
and the ideologies, you're looking at a nation of people having to you're creating a national unity, a national ideology out of many
The
people
goal was
from many countries.
the goal was to make it global, though. I'm going to read one last passage before we spend the rest of the time on the war in heaven, with some thoughts or questions on the war in heaven. So the U.S. Civil War took place at the heart of a global capitalist economy built on cotton and the labor of the enslaved, with ramifications felt in the Caribbean, Europe, Egypt, and South Asia. It also occurred amid a global explosion of violence in the mid-19th century. This period began with what were, in proportion to population, the century's two bloodiest wars. And it lists Taiping Rebellion in China and the War in the Pacific, 1879 to 84. Which saw Peru and Bolivia aligned against Chile. I'm going to skip down a minute here. And for the Americas, the interval marked the last among a great run of upheavals since the mid-18th century, during which efforts at imperial reconstruction had led to independence movements, revolutions, and civil wars, often with the result, if not always the original aim, of making smaller states out of larger ones and empires. A group within a state exasperated by what it sees as the suppression of its right to self-determination asserts that right as a claim to independent statehood. In response, the existing state asserts its right to territorial integrity and authority over all its inhabitants, resisting the group's claim with coercive violence. Secession, the attempt to create a new state, thereby leads to civil war, armed conflict within an established state. So I'll leave it there for now with, I just want to get that last portion in and try to use the rest of our time looking at the war in heaven. And I did share some of these thoughts with Penny. Is it you or Bob? Go ahead before I move on.
Well, I just wanted to just say briefly, when you were talking, or several were talking about how the United States, in some way has this profound ability to, so everybody wants to just follow the United States or not go against the United States. And believe it or not, it reminds me of just straight economics, with like a company. If you look at an example of a company that comes up and they have a product or several products that they're making, and they're not perfect, but they're coming up, and they put a lot of effort and time into a product, and as they start to market and sell that product, it gets more and more known, and as that product becomes very well known, and everything, then everybody relies and wants to buy that product because of its quality or the thing they can do. And then if economically they end up into an area where they refer to as a cash cow, because now they've already put all the R&D and all the work into it a long time ago, and now they're just making a whole lot of money off of it, and it's a good thing. But then what happens is they get prideful, and pride leads to blindness. And before you know it, they're cheapening the product and they're doing everything else. So they're riding on their old reputation, but they're not living up to that reputation anymore. But they're hoodwinking everybody. And I see that happen economically with products in the marketplace. And I see that in a certain way, looking at the United States and seeing how they came up and had built a really good reputation around the world, where they were, upcoming and getting better. They were never perfect and working on this stuff. And then you talk about how it goes from a lamb to being a lion, and it's just, you can see how the scale just tips, and it is because of pride, and then that leads to blindness, and there's more that can be said on it, but I don't want to divert from where you're going here right now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Pride and greed and hunger for power as well. So I did share some of my thoughts with Elder Parminder, so I'm going to pull in a couple things. I hope it's okay that I do this. Pull in a couple things that he said that also made me think even more and help me. So this little section right here, in italics, is actually his response to some of the things that I was asking him. So he was stating that so this is for us to think about as if he were here in the class with us as we go through this. Revolution equals change of the form or nature of government, not merely its replacement. Civil war equals a replacement of a government with another one that might be and often is identical. And then the next question that I asked him about the war in heaven, he said, I think it was Civil War, the Civil War period, regime change, but it was cloaked in the garb of a righteousness cause, a revolution, the overthrow replacement of a corrupt government with a new, better form of governance. So now we're going to read some of the quotes here, and there are plenty more that might be given more time brought in to try to pick apart to look, but I grabbed a few of the ones that talk about the war in heaven. And we see the war in heaven that breaks out in Revelation 12. And that chapter goes through the sequence of events. You get to the death of Christ, then you get to the wilderness period, and then you see that the woman is taken into this area that becomes the sixth head. So, and then just quoting back to something we've already read, Civil War is a war of opinion or ideology, a war of father, brothers, sons against one another, or humanity against humanity. Civil war is as a gift from, one is describing civil war as a gift from heaven, offering a chance for national renewal. So war in heaven, civil war or revolution. So far, I'm on the side of civil war. It's a war between two governments, God's government, which Satan rebels against. So I'll read them, and then I have the few things that I underlined. I thought we'd try to look at these words and what they, what they mean, synonyms to them, or what they mean. So until this time, and this is early writings, 145, paragraph 2. Until this time, all heaven had been in order, harmony and perfect subjection to the government of God. So this is pre-earth, pre-humanity. This is in heaven where you had harmony, and then this rebellion breaks out. So there's perfect subjection to the government of God. It was the highest sin to rebel against God's order and will. All heaven seemed in commotion. The angels were marshaled in companies, each division with a higher commanding angel at its head. Satan, ambitious to exalt themselves and unwilling to submit to the authority of Jesus, was insinuating against the government of God. Some of the angels sympathized with Satan in their rebellion, and others strongly contended for the honor and wisdom of God in giving authority to Jesus. There was contention among the angels. Satan and his sympathizers were striving to reform the government of God. They wished to look into God's unsearchable wisdom. And what did they want to find? They want to find God's purpose in exalting Jesus and endowing Jesus with such unlimited power and command. So it doesn't seem they want to do away with God's government, but the problem is what?
Jesus.
Jesus, or who, yeah, is so they wish to look into God's unsearchable wisdom and ascertain God's purpose in exalting Jesus and endowing Jesus with such unlimited power and command. They rebelled against the authority of Jesus. All the heavenly hosts were summoned to appear before God to have each case decided. It was there determined that Satan should be expelled from heaven with all the angels who joined him in the rebellion. Then there was war in heaven. So this was the next step. If I understand that correctly, he's going to be expelled, and then there was war in heaven. Angels were engaged in the battle. Satan wished to conquer the Son of God and those who were submissive to God's will. But the good and true angels prevailed, and Satan, with their followers, was driven from heaven. So I was looking at the word harmony. Does anybody have any thoughts, or if you want to look it up, that we could put for harmony? And I was looking at synonyms earlier this morning, or maybe it was last night. And if you can see that, are you able to see what pulls up on the screen?
Yes.
The synonyms, okay. So this one has accord or agreement or coordination, concord or coherence for harmony. Anybody want to add anything to harmony?
I think that covers it.
Okay, and then the next one I wanted was rebellion.
I was thinking peace for harmony.
Peace, yeah.
Yeah.
Me too.
Mhm.
So you're going to have accord, agreement, you're going to have peace.
Right.
So rebellion shows revolt, uprising, insurrection, revolution, and mutiny. Anybody have anything else that they would like to add to rebellion? I did pull out unsearchable, didn't find anything on it,
Rebellion?
but go ahead, yeah.
Oh, yeah. The rebellion, I have been thinking that the fact that I don't understand, I can't pinpoint exactly why he had to be kicked out of heaven, except that what I think it's God's government, so he still has the ultimate authority, right?
In one of the
And
next passages, I think we'll see that answer. Go ahead, sorry.
okay, and so I just thought about that, the fact that rebellion, I want to relate it or compare it to the human, like we, like we know that the devil has had at least 6,000 years to prove himself, right? To prove his kingdom. So if we go, I was thinking about humans, how they are given an opportunity also to rule, to have a king, to be an emperor, and whatever you want to call it. And I was thinking that isn't that also part of, how we're like the majority rules, right? So therefore, we got to do what the majority rules. But at the same time, when you think about the liberty of conscience, I I've always, well, not always. I'm starting to think that that also applies to the wicked. Like they have a right to be bad. They have a right to be evil because that's what they're choosing to be. And
That's certainly what they're exercising as their right, yes.
exactly. So I think that that's the way I am seeing it. Correct me if I'm wrong. I agree with everything that has been said. And at the same time, I'm thinking, well, I see God giving them that choice, respecting them to be who they want to be. So what we have developing, it's all um God's way of showing. Like I thought about Solomon. When Solomon had when he asked for wisdom, he did get wisdom, but then he got all the riches in addition. So he was able to exercise all his human senses, his human mind and brain can experience because he chose that. Like I see, I'm just seeing it like part of God's I want to say God's justice. Like he's letting them be. He's letting them develop. He's letting, just like how we see how there was a time when I was like, or even now I'm still like, why you know doesn't God see that the devil, the devil has done evil enough all these years? But it continues. So I see that it's God's way of showing the whole humankind, like God's way of letting them be, letting, respecting their. Does that make sense? I hope I'm because I have so many thoughts in my brain and I'm trying to put them into words so I can share. And I hope I'm not confusing anybody. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say.
So it's
I think
basically
so.
their free will. Is
Yes,
that what you're saying?
exactly.
Is just, yeah, their free will. I don't think we're going against any of that. What we're using as a compare and contrast.
What about schism for rebellion?
Did I spell it right?
Yes.
I think it has to come to that place where, like when you go back to Egypt, when people continue to rebel, um,
Or
I would,
yeah, I don't want to interrupt you. Or even I just thought about the other one when you had all these kings, these wicked kings during Israel's reign. Remember how they were just in power one after another? I mean, how horrible was that? It was terrible. So you see, that's why I can see how that, it's it's terrible, but at the same time, like that's how God allows, you have wicked kings, so he's not gonna, like take them away. He just lets them be. And then all humanity is just submissive and just paying, we're, I want to say paying the consequence, we're suffering under those consequences. But throughout the history, you can just constantly see that, how God allows, even though, we see a lot of thus said the Lord and that God did this and God did that. But in all that, you can also just see how God lets man be what he wants to be.
So, Eva, are you basically saying, in a summary, God is just dealing with the humans that he has, and he's limited. God's limited, and what was the other word I was going to do? But ultimately, God is still orchestrating, their will be done. But humanity is made with a free will, and the consequences that come with whichever direction you go, pretty much. So it takes both, right? But there is a separation of people who are God's people and people who are Satan's agents. Is that
see
kind
what
of like,
you had.
Yes, and remember how Elder Tess had said that one time when she said that God's hands are tied.
mm-hmm.
It had to be
So
allowed to
I
play out.
Yeah,
so
because
that's how
Satan
I'm
wasn't
thinking about
destroyed.
it.
Yeah, because Satan wasn't destroyed immediately.
No, because that wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah, it was a
That
test
would
for
be like his creation. Like when you think about God made everything so perfect.
But
And
it would have,
every creature, and the fact that he wasn't allowed. I need to go back because when Jesus and God are in this secret meeting, if you want to call it secret, I thought, well, now I'm thinking why the Lucifer was not allowed to go in that meeting.
yeah, that
He
was
was the highest, right? He was in the highest position of all the angels, of all the created angels, but he was not allowed. I am thinking because he wasn't he hadn't passed the test. Like he and well, not only did he wasn't passing the test, like the test was given and he failed it.
yeah,
And
and I
because
think
he failed the
oh, I'm
test.
sorry, didn't
No, no, go
Elder
ahead.
Parmenter say it was an unfair test?
yes.
Because it's like, wow, all this time he was up there and next to God with all the glory, and then there's a meeting and sorry, you can't come.
And
Yeah, so
to
then why did he say unfair test? Because I think the fact that he says unfair test is because that's what Lucifer would be saying, right? Like, wait, I've served all this time. I should be allowed to be in that meeting. I think that there was a lot of rationale done. I mean, a rationale with Lucifer, but I think that he didn't have, like, he didn't pass the test, like the test that, or maybe he just like thought he was privileged and like didn't need to have any tests because he was exposed long enough, thousands, who knows, of millennia, and he had so much sorority. Is that what you call it? Sorority, like he has a privilege. Like, hello. So
Seniority.
yeah, that. So I'm thinking that all of this probably was in his brain as this qualifies me to be in this meeting, when of course this meeting was so out of this world because it called for humility, it called for sacrifice, it called for rescuing human beings for the first time ever. you know for the first time ever, this intruder, the sin, and it had to be obviously there had to be a solution. There had to be a payment to be made, and he was not part of that, of course. But I'm saying is that he allows them to, okay, you're rebelling, and then all these other angels listen to you. Okay, you're out of here. And sure enough, he was out of here. He had to go somewhere. So, unfortunately, happened to be planet Earth, but that's still like part of, the development of his kingdom. And at the same time, the development of God's government, like his justice, it's like both. Like you're going to see, like Adam and Eve see the good and evil. Okay, so now you're going to see what's good, but then you're also going to see what's evil for the first time. And we're all under it. And we just have to choose which side.
Let me try
Anyway,
to
that was just that. That's
thank
enough.
you.
I don't want to say anymore.
No, thank you for that. I just want to, because I'm out of time and I want to be respectful to Francisco's time, try to do a real quick wrap up and leave it here, and it can be a continued discussion for a later time. Satan.
My presentations is relatively short, so if you want extra
Okay.
time, you can have it.
Okay. I'll still try to wrap it up. So I want to read this passage here that talks about one of the points that Ava was asking about. After Satan, and this is early writings 146.1, after Satan and those who fell with him were shut out of heaven, and he realized that he had forever lost all of its heaven's purity and glory, he repented and wished to be reinstated in heaven. He was willing to take his proper place or any position that might be assigned him. But no, heaven must not be placed in jeopardy. So my question was, what would allowing him to come back, why would that place heaven in jeopardy? And all heaven might be marred should he be taken back, for sin originated with him and the seeds of rebellion were with him. Both he and his followers wept and implored to be taken back into the favor of God, but their sin, their hatred, their envy, and jealousy had been so great that God could not blot it out. It must remain to receive its final punishment when that would come. So if you look at Jesus, what Satan or what Lucifer knew was, here we are side by side as equals, and then there's God. The angels and even Lucifer, because there was all harmony before, had love and respect and trust in God. Now all of a sudden there's this Jesus that is side by side with Lucifer, is suddenly put in his higher position. And he's not suddenly put in that higher position. Lucifer just didn't know the position. Just like when Jesus comes to heaven, Jesus put in the position of humanity, and yet Jesus had that higher position. So if you let Lucifer back in and all those that rebelled, was the issue resolved, or was there still hatred, envy, and jealousy? Would that still exist? Did he respect Jesus in the higher authority, or did he still hate and envy and have jealousy?
If I can you hear me? This is Phil.
Yeah.
So this reminds me of the prodigal son, that after Satan had those who fell with him were shut out of heaven and realized that he had forever lost all his purity and glory, he repented. He repented not because he realized the Father was right and Jesus was right. He repented because he had lost purity
Yes.
and the glory. It was about him. It was still about himself, what he lost. It was not about the righteousness of God. So so that jealousy and all of that impurity, it still remained within him, within Lucifer. And
That's a lot.
just like the prodigal son, he went back because he got sick and tired of eating pig's food, he didn't realize the righteousness of his father.
Right.
That's like the the people who are regretting who voted for Trump, but they're only
Yes.
regretting because they're feeling the financial pain. They're
Right.
not regretting because they see the abuse. Well, some of them are. I'm going to say this:
Yeah.
the inhumanities being treated, on how humanities being treated in the United States through all the different actions, whether it's policies or literal, the immigration detentions and things like that. Their heart hasn't changed for most of them. It's just they've been touched by these things.
Yeah. So he's got hatred, envy, and jealousy, and you finish that sentence through. Had it had been so great that God could not blot it out. In other words, it wasn't going to go away. God can't blot out what you want to hold on to. And then she says it must remain to receive its final punishment. So because it's Satan that is hanging on to the hatred, and if Satan were let back in heaven, the hatred and the envy and the jealousy was still there. And you can't blot out what someone doesn't want to give up and let go.
Well, think about how they would think when we arrive.
Exactly. Exactly. So we can close it, leave it there. I think there's a lot there to think about when this happened, because I started to think this morning, okay, so this was before the earth was ever even created and the war in heaven. Can you place that here? Because here we are now in this 6,000 year period and then coming on the 1,000 years. Can you replace what was in heaven, or can you parallel what was in heaven with what's on earth? I think yes, but there is maybe a greater fulfillment at the end of the 1,000 years. So lots to think about when it comes to this. But I think we're starting to see, or at least I feel like I am starting to see this bigger purpose. And when you look at the United States as a person that has to grow, as a child that needs to grow and needs to unlearn from all of the damage that it's had, here we are still damaged, but God has chosen us out of the world to bring us closer to God. So as I close in prayer, we can continue this discussion another time, but we can think on these things. So let's go ahead and we'll close in prayer. Almighty God in heaven, we are thankful for that we were chosen and that you saw something in us that you could work with, but that you have been opening up your character, your true character with us, that as we see your love, your patience, your kindness, your guidance, your direction, all the fruit of the Spirit, as we see that, how you are with us, it's my prayer that that's how we would be with one another, and that your light, your kingdom would be seen on earth in these final days to show as a contrast to the hatred, that others might still be drawn to you. May you continue to bless us this Sabbath day. We thank you for the blessing, privilege, and honor to be here. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.